The glass of wine in her hand shook as my words broke through the facade of control she believed she had. The speech she and Eric had meticulously prepared vanished into silence, leaving her vulnerable to the overwhelming evidence I presented. The truth had finally caught up with her, and there was nowhere left to run. Her denials and excuses fell apart as I seized control of the story she thought she owned. But before we get too deep into this tale, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and if you're into stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on what's coming up next. For a decade, our marriage was a journey of shared dreams and unyielding commitment. Cher and I had built a life together, one that was once overflowing with love, laughter, and a strong sense of partnership. I can still recall those early days, the spark between us, the easy connection we had. Everything, our passions, our fears, our ambitions, whether it was something as simple as a late-night grocery run or an adventurous road trip, we experienced it all together. It wasn't just love, it was the kind of bond that seemed unbreakable. But as time passed, things changed. Our once lively connection started to unravel, at first subtly, then with undeniable clarity. The signs were there, small and almost unnoticeable at first, a missed dinner here, an unexplained lateness there. Rachel's interest in our shared hobbies diminished. The pottery classes she used to love, the Sunday afternoons spent painting tiny tiles for our Christmas village, those moments of togetherness had become distant memories. Her laughter, once so vibrant, seemed forced when we were alone. I tried to dismiss it as stress or the natural ups and downs of a long-term relationship, but deep down, a nagging suspicion began to grow. Something wasn't right. The changes in Rachel became more apparent. She started coming home later and later, always with a ready excuse, work deadlines, a sudden team meeting, or traffic delays. Her wardrobe also transformed. The comfortable clothes she'd worn for years were replaced by more daring, provocative choices. I wanted to believe she was just embracing a new sense of self-confidence, but my gut told me there was more to it. And then there was Eric. I'd heard his name mentioned in passing, a coworker from her job. At first, it seemed harmless, she spoke of him in the same casual way she talked about everyone else at work. But as time went on, I noticed how frequently his name came up in conversations, how her face lit up when she talked about him. It was a kind of glow I hadn't seen in her for a long time. Every time I tried to confront her, to gently express my growing concerns, Rachel dismissed me with practiced ease. "You're just being paranoid," she'd say, her tone a mix of exasperation and calmness. "Eric is just a friend. Don't let your insecurities destroy what we have." Her words cut deep, not because I believed them, but because they were so calculated, so dismissive. It was as if my feelings didn't matter. But I knew what I saw, what I felt. Rachel was slowly slipping away from me, piece by piece. The turning point came one evening when I stumbled upon a seemingly harmless detail, an email she had left open. The words weren't incriminating, but the tone was intimate, far beyond what any professional correspondence should be. That was when I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed answers, and I needed the truth. Driven by a mix of heartbreak and determination, I found myself sitting in the office of Noah Grant, a private investigator. It was a last resort, a step I'd never imagined taking. As I shared my suspicions with Noah Grant, I felt a mix of dread and relief wash over me. If Rachel was truly cheating on me, at least I'd have the proof I needed. Yet, a part of me still held on to hope, yearning to believe that the woman I had loved so deeply for 10 years wouldn't destroy the life we had built together. The report from Noah Grant, the private investigator, painted a clear and undeniable picture of Rachel and Eric's relationship. It was evident that their connection had long surpassed the boundaries of mere friendship. The evidence, gathered through meticulous observation, photographs, and a summary of intercepted messages, left no room for doubt. Their bond was intimate, their actions intentional, and their intentions crystal clear. From the very beginning, their interactions radiated an intimacy that couldn't be dismissed as platonic. Photographs captured them sitting intimately close during their lunch breaks, their hands brushing in fleeting but purposeful gestures. Rachel, who had always been so reserved, was seen laughing with Eric in a way that went beyond casual friendship. One particular image stood out, Eric leaning over to tuck a strand of hair behind Rachel's ear. It was a small gesture, but the tenderness it conveyed was unmistakable. These subtle actions, easily overlooked by the untrained, spoke volumes about the true nature of their relationship. In his summary, Sloane detailed the content of their private messages. While Rachel had avoided explicit declarations of love, the tone of their exchanges was deeply personal and revealing. Eric frequently complimented her in ways that went beyond the professional, praising her intelligence, her smile, and her presence. In turn, Rachel opened up about her feelings of dissatisfaction and loneliness in our marriage. The messages weren't just flirtatious, they were confessional. Eric had become her confidant, someone she trusted with her innermost thoughts, a role that should have been mine as her husband. Even more damning were their plans to meet outside of work. Eric had suggested a romantic dinner at a secluded restaurant, followed by an evening of dancing. Rachel's initial hesitation was evident in the messages, but Eric's persistence was equally clear. He assured her that their time together wasn't a betrayal but a necessary step toward her self-discovery. His words were carefully crafted, designed to ease her guilt while drawing her deeper into his influence. Eric's manipulation became increasingly apparent in the way he framed their relationship as a solution rather than a problem. He convinced Rachel that their bond could reignite her passion and, paradoxically, improve our marriage. "Sometimes stepping away is the only way to truly see what you have," he wrote in one message. He also planted the idea that I, her husband, might ultimately accept the affair if it made her happier. Eric's rhetoric was manipulative but effective, appealing to Rachel's insecurities while masking his selfish motives. The climax of their plans came when Eric proposed a getaway. With his wife conveniently out of town, he suggested a night at a luxury hotel. The messages revealed their excitement but also their careful plotting. Rachel debated lying about a girls' weekend, yet Eric's reassurance emboldened her. "You deserve this," he insisted. His ability to twist the narrative into one where Rachel felt justified in her actions was a hallmark of his control. In weaving these threads together, the investigator's report highlighted not only the depth of Rachel and Eric's emotional entanglement but also the calculated way Eric had drawn her in. His promises, while appealing, were empty manipulations designed to serve his desires. For Rachel, the temptation of Eric's attention had turned into a perilous escape from her life, but the harm it caused to our marriage was deep. Each new piece of evidence brought me closer to the moment when I would confront Rachel, shattering any remaining illusions she had about their actions. The growing evidence, the intimate gestures and Eric's psychological manipulation, were pieces of a heartbreaking puzzle that would change everything. The private investigator's report was comprehensive, yet going through it was a painful ordeal. Every piece of evidence felt like a new cut, slicing deeper into the trust one once had in Rachel. The documentation was thorough, photographs of subtle but incriminating gestures, summaries of secret conversations, and notes on their upcoming plans. Each detail confirmed my worst fears. Rachel's emotional infidelity had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. One part of the report focused on their interactions at work. The photographs captured moments that might seem harmless to an outsider, Rachel leaning close to Eric during a lunch break, their knees touching under a small cafe table, or a quick hug in the parking lot. But these weren't the actions of two coworkers, they exuded a level of intimacy that was impossible to overlook. A particularly painful image showed Eric brushing stray hair from Rachel's face, his expression soft and possessive. Rachel's reaction was equally revealing. She tilted her head slightly, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. The private investigator had also compiled excerpts from Rachel and Eric's text messages. They weren't explicit but were filled with emotional intimacy. Eric showered her with endless flattery, praising her intelligence, beauty, and wit. In one message, he wrote, "You make my days brighter, Rachel. I can't imagine getting through the week without you." Rachel responded with equal passion, "You understand me in ways no one else does." Their conversations often turned to me, though Rachel, to her credit, never outright insulted me. Eric, however, wasn't as restrained. He called me rigid and unimaginative, subtly suggesting that I was incapable of giving Rachel the life she deserved. What hurt the most was her silence in response to these jabs, a silent agreement that I had let her down. The most damning section of the report detailed their future plans. Eric had suggested taking advantage of his wife's absence to spend a night together at a luxury hotel. Their messages revealed meticulous planning. Rachel hesitated at first, brainstorming excuses to justify her absence. "Maybe I could say it's a girls' weekend," she suggested in one message. Eric dismissed this idea, arguing that the lie was too risky. Instead, he urged her to simply tell me the truth. "He'll come around," Eric insisted. "If he loves you, he'll want you to be happy, even if it's with someone else." Reading these words sparked a fury I didn't know I was capable of. Eric's arrogance was astounding, but what hurt most was Rachel's willingness to entertain the idea. She seemed to genuinely believe that I would go along with it, that I would silently endure her betrayal to keep her in my life. The sheer audacity of their scheme, to treat this as a so-called intervention aimed at normalizing their affair, was beyond comprehension. The conflicting emotions were overwhelming. On one hand, I felt a fleeting sense of relief knowing that Rachel and Eric hadn't yet crossed the final boundary of physical intimacy. But that relief was quickly overshadowed by the crushing weight of betrayal. Emotional infidelity, in many ways, felt even more devastating. Rachel had given parts of herself, her thoughts, her dreams, her vulnerability, to another man. The realization left me feeling hollow, consumed by a raw, seething anger. I found myself swinging between heartbreak and rage. Memories of our early days together flooded my mind, the long walks, the shared hobbies, the nights spent laughing until our sides hurt. How had we gone from that to this? I wanted to scream, to lash out, to confront Rachel right away, but I knew that would only play into their hands. If I wanted to take back control, I needed to approach this strategically. Over the weekend, I threw myself into planning the confrontation. I ran through every possible scenario in my head, anticipating Rachel's reactions and crafting my responses. My goal wasn't just to expose her deceit but to ensure she couldn't twist the narrative in her favor. She and Eric had rehearsed their intervention, but they hadn't anticipated the depth of my determination. First, I decided to stage the confrontation in a controlled environment, our home. It was a place where I felt grounded, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. I set the scene meticulously, a bottle of her favorite wine, chilled and ready, 2 glasses arranged neatly on the table. The setup was intentional, a juxtaposition of calm against the storm of emotions I planned to unleash. Next, I prepared the evidence. I printed copies of the investigator's report, highlighting key sections that left no room for misinterpretation. I rehearsed my delivery, ensuring that my tone would remain calm but firm. There would be no yelling, no dramatic outbursts. I wanted Rachel to feel the weight of her actions through my composure, to see that I wasn't the naive, passive husband she had underestimated. Finally, I decided to preempt her planned speech. Rachel expected to lead the conversation, to frame her betrayal as a misguided attempt to fix our marriage, but I had no intention of letting her dictate the terms. My opening line would be simple but devastating: "I want a divorce." It would strip away her control from the outset, forcing her to confront the consequences of her actions. By Monday morning, my plan was complete, but the waiting was agonizing. Every moment felt heavy with anticipation, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. When Rachel called during lunch to confirm I'd be home that evening, her voice was sweet, almost carefree. "There's something important I need to talk to you about," she said. I couldn't help but marvel at her confidence, her belief that she could orchestrate this conversation on her terms. "That's perfect," I replied evenly. "I have something important to discuss with you too." The silence on the other end of the line was palpable. I could almost hear her calculating, trying to discern the meaning behind my words. Finally, she replied, "All right, then. I'll see you tonight." As I hung up, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The pieces were in place, The stage was set. Whatever happened that evening, it would be on my terms. I had allowed Rachel and Eric to write the first chapters of this story, but now it was my turn to take control of the narrative. The kitchen was bathed in a soft, warm light, the kind that usually set the tone for a quiet, peaceful evening. A bottle of Sauvignon Blanc sat on the table, beads of condensation slowly trickling down its surface next to two perfectly polished glasses. Everything about the scene suggested tranquility, an illusion carefully crafted by me to contrast with the emotional tempest about to unfold. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence as I waited, each passing second heightening the tension that coiled in my chest like a spring. I could hear the familiar sound of Rachel's car pulling into the driveway, followed by the low creak of the garage door. Moments later, her heels clicked rhythmically against the tiled floor, drawing closer. The door swung open, and she stepped inside, her keys jingling as she tossed them onto the counter. "Hey, honey," she greeted, her tone light, almost cheerful, though there was a hint of hesitance beneath it. "Welcome home," I replied, keeping my voice calm and measured. I gestured toward the table. "I thought we could have a chat." Rachel paused, her smile wavering slightly as her eyes flicked to the wine. She hadn't anticipated this, me waiting, prepared, and composed. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but she quickly masked it, slipping into the role she had rehearsed. "Of course," she said, moving to sit across from me. The first few moments were filled with an uneasy silence as I poured the wine, handing her a glass. She took a sip, her fingers gripping the stem tightly. "I actually wanted to talk to you too," she began, her tone overly casual. "There's something I think we need to address." "Go ahead," I said, leaning back slightly. My demeanor was inviting yet unnervingly controlled, throwing her off balance. Rachel took a deep breath, her eyes momentarily avoiding mine. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately," she started, her voice steady but laced with a nervous undertone, "about our marriage and ways we might be able to strengthen it." My lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Strengthen it," I echoed. Interesting choice of words. "Please, continue." She hesitated again, her practiced lines slipping away as my calmness began to unnerve her. "Well, I've been feeling like maybe we've lost some of the spark," she ventured, her voice faltering, "and I think there might be ways to rekindle that. Like a romantic dinner and an overnight stay at the Gaylord Texan Hotel?" I asked, my tone cutting but still composed. The color drained from her face, and her hand froze mid-motion. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice breaking. I leaned forward, meeting her eyes with a piercing gaze. "Don't insult my intelligence, Rachel," I said, my voice low but firm. "I know everything, about you, about Eric, about the plans you've been making." Her glass trembled in her hand, and she hastily set it down before it tipped over. "That's not true," she said quickly, her voice rising. "You're imagining things." "Enough," I interrupted sharply. The single word sliced through her denial like a blade. I reached into the folder beside me and slid a series of photographs across the table. Rachel's eyes widened as she saw the damning evidence, her hand entwined with Eric's, the two of them leaning close, his lips brushing her cheek in a moment captured with unflinching clarity. Her breath hitched, and she looked up at me, her face pale. "I can explain," she whispered. "I'm sure you can," I said bitterly, folding my arms, "but nothing you say will erase what I've seen, what I've read." I tapped the folder, my eyes never leaving hers. "Emails, texts, lunch dates, late nights, you've been planning this for weeks, haven't you?" Tears began to pool in her eyes as she shook her head weakly. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. Eric and I, it's not serious. It never went that far." My laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "Not serious?" I repeated, my tone incredulous. "You were rehearsing how to tell me you wanted a date night with another man, Rachel. You planned to come home to me afterward like nothing happened, and you call that not serious?" Rachel's composure began to crumble, her shoulders shaking as tears spilled over. "I made a mistake," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "You lied to me, betrayed me, and then convinced yourself that I'd be okay with it. You thought I'd sit here and let you make a fool of me." Her sobs intensified, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if it were her only anchor. "Please, just listen to me," she pleaded. "I'll end it. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." I shook my head slowly, my expression set like stone. "It's too late for that, Rachel," I said, my voice heavy with finality. "I want a divorce." The word struck her like a physical blow, and she gasped, her eyes widening in shock. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, you can't mean that. You don't mean that." "I do," I said firmly. "I've already talked to a lawyer. You'll be served the papers by Friday." Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands, her sobs muffled but heart-wrenching. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking, "don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've built." I stood, my chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. "You threw it away the moment you chose him over us," I said coldly. "I'm done, Rachel." As I turned to leave the room, her cries echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. The tranquility of the kitchen had been shattered, replaced by the raw, unfiltered reality of our broken marriage. The confrontation had ended, but the aftermath would linger like the bitter taste of unfinished wine. As the front door closed behind me, leaving Rachel alone in the silence of the house, she felt her world crumbling. Desperation surged, and she ran after me, stopping me at the foot of the stairs. Her voice cracked as she called out, "Please, wait." I turned, my face a mask of exhaustion and cold resolve, but my eyes betrayed a glimmer of the pain I tried to hide. "Please, let me explain," she pleaded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as though trying to hold the pieces of herself together. "I swear it wasn't physical. It never got that far. I know I betrayed your trust, but it was just, I don't know what I was thinking. I was lonely. I felt disconnected from you, from us." Her voice wavered, and tears streamed down her face. "Eric made me feel noticed, like I mattered again, but it was a mistake, all of it. I see that now. I never stopped loving you, I swear." I stood motionless, her words cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. The mention of love felt hollow, almost mocking, yet her raw vulnerability forced me to pause. Her words didn't excuse her actions, but they illuminated the cracks that had formed in our foundation long before Eric entered our lives. For a moment, I let my mind drift to the past, to the love we had once shared. I remembered the early days of our marriage, when everything had felt effortless, as though we were the only two people in the world, long walks in the park, laughter over shared inside jokes, and quiet evenings spent painting Christmas village houses together. Back then, even the simplest moments had felt extraordinary because we were together. But time had worn away that magic. I recalled the growing distance, how our shared laughter had been replaced by polite small talk, and our once intimate nights had dwindled into a routine silence. Somewhere along the way, our priorities had shifted, and we had stopped making time for each other. Still, as much as I acknowledged my own role in the erosion of our marriage, I couldn't ignore the weight of her betrayal. "Maybe we both made mistakes," I said finally, my voice low and heavy, "but you made a choice, Rachel, a choice to turn away from me when things got hard." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't comfort her. Instead, I turned again and walked away, the echo of my footsteps leaving behind a haunting stillness that I in the quiet, clinical atmosphere of the therapist's office. Rachel and I sat across from each other, the distance between us feeling vast despite our close proximity. The therapist, a gentleman with compassionate eyes, guided our conversation, encouraging us to delve into the roots of our pain. For the first time in years, we spoke openly about our feelings, fears, and regrets, yet each word seemed to widen the gap between us. Rachel spoke of the loneliness that had slowly infiltrated her life, her longing for connection, and the guilt that overwhelmed her as her emotional affair with Eric unfolded. Her voice broke as she confessed, "I was selfish. I wasn't thinking about us, about what we had. I thought I was finding something I'd lost, but now I see I was only pushing it further away." Her words sparked a flicker of empathy in me. I recognized the isolation she described because I had felt it too. I had been just as guilty in allowing our bond to weaken, but I hadn't sought comfort in someone else. That was the boundary she had crossed, the one I couldn't forgive. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I talked about the humiliation and betrayal, the sleepless nights filled with suspicion, and the sharp pain of seeing the evidence laid bare. "It's not just about what you did," I said, my voice steady but pained. "It's about the trust you shattered, the trust one don't know how to rebuild. Every time I think about forgiving you, I remember those pictures, those messages, and I can't." The therapist acknowledged the depth of our wounds but suggested paths forward, rebuilding trust through honesty, rekindling our connection with time, and letting go of the past. Yet, as the sessions continued, it became clear that the damage was too extensive. My walls were too high, and Rachel's remorse, however genuine, wasn't enough to break them down. On the final day of therapy, I spoke with a quiet resolve. "I've tried to find a way to move past this, but I can't. I'll always wonder, always doubt, and that's no way to live, for either of us." Rachel's tears fell freely, but she didn't argue. Somewhere deep down, she knew I was right. As we left the office for the last time, it was clear our marriage was over, irreparably fractured by choices that couldn't be undone. The legal proceedings were as cold and transactional as the emotional wreckage that had preceded them. Sitting across from Rachel in the sterile confines of the mediator's office, I couldn't help but feel a bitter sense of finality. This wasn't the life we had envisioned a decade ago when we stood before family and friends and pledged, forever, to one another. Now, forever, had come to an unceremonious end, boiled down to numbers and signatures. The mediator began by outlining the division of assets. Our home, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, was to be sold. The proceeds would be divided equitably, though not evenly. Rachel's emotional infidelity, though not physical, carried weight in the proceedings. The evidence provided by the private investigator painted a clear picture of her betrayal. This, coupled with her admission during therapy, tipped the scales in my favor. Rachel's share of the marital assets was diminished as a result. She was to receive less than half of the proceeds from the sale of the house. The rest would go to me, along with the larger share of our savings. The decision was met with a resigned silence from Rachel. She had no room to protest. She understood the consequences of her actions. The cars were divided with the same reasoning. I kept the newer vehicle, which I had been paying for on my own, while Rachel was left with the older model. It was a stark reminder of how our once shared life had been dismantled, piece by piece, into separate and unequal parts. Meanwhile, Eric's situation took its own turn. His wife, who had also hired a private investigator, acted decisively once she had the evidence of his emotional affair with Rachel. Their divorce was swift and uncompromising, leaving Eric with even fewer resources than Rachel. But the irony didn't end there. Despite his promises and assurances to Rachel, Eric showed no intention of committing to her once his own marriage ended. When Rachel reached out to him, seeking solace in the man she had jeopardized her marriage for, she was met with cold detachment. Eric had already moved on, pursuing a younger woman he had met through work. His emotional manipulation, once cloaked in words of affection and understanding, revealed itself as self-serving opportunism. By the end of it all, Rachel was left isolated, her life in disarray. She had lost her marriage, her home, and the man she thought would offer her a new beginning. The consequences of her choices weighed heavily on her, leaving her to confront the emptiness they had created. I, on the other hand, found a sense of closure. Though the process had been painful, it marked a turning point, a chance to rebuild without the shadow of betrayal looming overhead. As the final papers were signed, I walked away, resolute in my decision to leave the past behind. For both of us, the legal proceedings were more than a division of assets, they were the closing chapter of a life we could never reclaim. The divorce, though painful, marked the beginning of a new chapter for me. Freed from the weight of betrayal and distrust, I embraced my newfound independence with a sense of purpose. The mornings no longer began with tension and suspicion but with quiet moments of reflection and gratitude. I rediscovered the simple pleasures of life, exploring local parks, taking long drives to nowhere, and reconnecting with old friends. These activities, once overshadowed by the heaviness of my crumbling marriage, became a source of joy and renewal. As weeks turned into months, opportunities for growth appeared. I took up photography, finding solace and creativity in capturing the world through a new lens. Weekends were filled with workshops and meetups, where I found camaraderie among others who shared my passion. Through these interactions, I met people who enriched my life in unexpected ways, including a woman whose laughter and warmth reminded me of the possibilities of a fresh start. While I approached this budding relationship with caution, I also allowed myself to feel hopeful about love again. In contrast, Rachel's life unraveled further. Left alone after Eric's abrupt departure, he divorced his wife but showed no intention of committing to her. Rachel found herself isolated. Eric had been a fleeting escape, not the lasting connection she had imagined. The relationships she tried to pursue afterward felt shallow and unsatisfying. Men who were initially interested in her were deterred by the baggage she carried, and she struggled to find someone willing to build something meaningful. Her nights grew lonelier, her once busy social calendar replaced by evenings of scrolling through old photos and messages, haunted by what she had lost. Rachel reflected on her decisions with a mix of regret and shame, finally admitting to herself the depth of her mistakes. How could I have been so blind, she wondered, her voice echoing in an empty house. The realization that she had traded something real and enduring for a fleeting thrill was a bitter pill to swallow. The contrast between our lives was stark. While I thrived, forging a new path filled with promise and joy, Rachel remained trapped in the consequences of her actions. Her efforts to rebuild her life were hindered by her inability to fully forgive herself, leaving her in a cycle of self-doubt and longing for the stability she once had. As the story drew to a close, the message became clear: life is shaped by the choices we make and the responsibility we take for those choices. My growth illustrated the power of resilience and the importance of letting go, while Rachel's struggles underscored the lasting impact of regret and missed opportunities. Together, our journeys offered a poignant reminder of the importance of trust, honesty, and the courage to face the consequences of one's actions.